Park. Okay. Okay, so like I was saying, I'm Miss Corbett, one of the school counselors at Myers Park. And today we have Miss Devin McCarthy James, and she will be presenting to us from College Foundation of North Carolina, all about financial aid and the process, paying for college, and what you need to know. Okay, so I'm not sure if you just joined, but if so, she will complete her presentation and then ask questions at the end. All right. Okay, so Ms. McCarthy James, if you would like to get started, you can.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so
Welcome.
much. Welcome, everybody. Like she said, I'm Devin McCarthy James, and I am one of the regional representatives for the College Foundation of North Carolina. I'm happy to be here talking to you about financial aid and just generally paying for college is what we're going to be talking about. So as I go along, I'm just going to give you some tips and some resources to help you through this process because everybody has a different situation. So everybody might need a slightly different resource. So just keep that in mind, that I'll point out some places for you to follow up on towards the end if you still have questions. So first, I do want to just give you an overview of some of the things we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about North Carolina Countdown to College Month, which is October. So we're very excited about counting down to college for our seniors, and some opportunities that happen this month. We'll talk about generally what to look for in the cost of college attendance, like what college really costs. We'll talk about different types of financial aid, how to apply for them, the main applications for financial aid. We'll talk a little bit about where to find scholarships and a whole lot about where you can find resources to help with these processes. So first, CFNC, the College Foundation of North Carolina. Hopefully you're familiar with us already. If not, I highly recommend you get on cfnc.org. Most high school students, before they graduate from high school in North Carolina, will end up with a CFNC account for a number of different reasons. So if your student already has an account, that's great. They can use that same account to do a lot of college application things that they used for maybe career assessments, things like that. And also keep in mind, we have a toll-free telephone advice line, and you can actually call and ask questions either in English or in Spanish as you have questions about applying for college, paying for college, all those questions that, sort of come up during the process. And so if you haven't been on CFNC, and in particular for seniors, sometimes folks just don't know where to start. And so I really recommend going to cfnc.org/plan. I know that seems counterintuitive because you're thinking, oh, I need to go to the apply section. But the plan section has this great clickable timeline. And if you click on senior, you'll see something similar to what I have on the screen here. And it gives you some suggested activities, some suggested places to start, and some really key resources that we have on CFNC for seniors. So I definitely recommend starting there. Couple of things I'll point out that are on there right now that you definitely want to check out are the list of deadlines here, the Know Your Deadlines. That's going to be a list of deadlines for all North Carolina colleges. So public, private, 2-year, 4-year. So that could be a really good place to start just to get organized with your application process. And then we talked about a minute ago, October is North Carolina Countdown to College Month. So now is a great time to click on this Countdown to College link. So North Carolina Countdown to College, it's really a big campaign, a statewide campaign with the CFNC and all sorts of other partners in the local schools and throughout the state, really, working to help high school seniors complete the 3 steps to college enrollment. So applying for residency for North Carolina colleges, applying for the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid that we'll talk about a little bit today, and then applying, of course, for college admission. So there's a lot of help on the website on cfnc.org/C2C. There's a lot of resources on there. And then there's also events that happen at local high schools to kind of support families with this process. You can also opt in for text message reminders about important things that are happening this month if you text CFNC to 66599. So that can give you some good updates. Even if you feel like you're on the right track, sometimes it's helpful to just have a reminder to your phone. Oh yeah, I've got to do that. So when you go to the Countdown to College page, this is one of the things that you can click on, which is the 2021 event schedule. This is a clickable calendar of different events that are happening this month. So you're actually coming to this event in a really good time because you're getting a preview of all the things that are happening in October. So the first thing to know is that these are all statewide virtual events listed here. So it's in addition to anything that might be happening locally, just to give you just a little bit of extra support. So each one of these weeks is dedicated to a specific topic. This week's topic is Imagine Your Future, trying to pick the right fit college. Next week is more focused on financial aid and RDS. And then the third week is application week. So that's going to be primarily all about applications. There's also FAFSA day, which is on a Saturday, sort of at the end of that week. And we'll talk a little bit more about what's happening for that later in the program. And then that last week, so often we worry about the process, but we don't talk about what happens next. What happens after you filled out your applications and your FAFSA application and your RDS? What happens? So we want to talk to folks about what to expect the remainder of senior year in there. And one thing I really like about this site in general is that you can go to the different links for students, for parents. You can find so much information on there. And then you might not even need to come to those events, but you have the option. Once you go through that stuff, if you still have questions, you can join us. Or if you're like, I don't have time to read through all that, give me the highlights, you can join us in one of these statewide events. So you heard me mention application week. Now, college application week isn't just a theme for us. It's a big deal in North Carolina. There are a lot of North Carolina schools who waive their college application fees if you click submit on an application through CFNC the third week of October. So the October 18th through 22nd is a great time to apply to any of the schools that you see on the screen right now. I highly recommend checking that out because college application fees, North Carolina community colleges are free to apply to at any time, but a lot of the four-year colleges can charge between $30 all the way up to $90. It just depends on the college. And so if you're applying to multiple schools, that can really add up. So definitely try and save some money and see if there's not at least one school on this list. There's a lot of different schools. There's usually one that a student can find to apply for free during that week. Also, one quick pro tip, students can start the application on CFNC at any time. They just need to make sure to click submit through the CFNC application during that week in order to receive the waiver. So the first way I like to talk about saving money for college, on paying for college, is really do your research about the colleges themselves. Clearly by this point, your students and families, you're all looking at different colleges for, where might be the right fit for your student, but also think about the financial aid part of things. Think about the financial fit for your family. So a couple of things to consider. There's the NC Promise program, which you may have heard of and we are really excited about. There's 3 colleges in the UNC system schools that offer $500 per semester or $1,000 per year tuition. Tuition is not the only expensive college, and we'll talk about that, but that's definitely a really great discount on college tuition. So Western Carolina University, UNC Pembroke, and Elizabeth City State University all have a much lower tuition rate than the other colleges in the system. Then I always like to point out that tuition at all UNC system schools, so any of those schools on that map there, is fixed for 8 semesters as long as the student stays at that institution the whole time, continuously enrolled. So even if you don't go to one of the 3 NC Promise schools in the UNC system, you can still potentially save money if you're going to be at that school for 4 years if you have that fixed tuition from the day you start to the day you graduate. Also, don't count out those independent colleges and universities. One of the most common things I hear from students and parents is almost a sticker shock. Looking at the cost of these private colleges can be a little bit intimidating because they start out being much more expensive in a lot of cases than the public schools in our state. However, I would encourage you to go through the process of financial aid because those schools also have different pots of money to pull from, things like endowments. They have money that they have to give to incoming students that oftentimes can make things a little bit more reasonable than you thought it would be at the beginning of the process. So if a student's in love with a private school, don't count it out until you go through the financial aid process and see what it's really going to end up costing. And then, of course, last but never least, our North Carolina community colleges. Perhaps you're already taking advantage of some of their programs to help students save money, like the dual enrollment programs, where you take high school classes and college classes at the same time at your local high school for free, which is fantastic. But there's also a lot of other opportunities at community colleges. First of all, there's apprenticeship programs at many North Carolina community colleges that can help students not only save money on college, but also earn money while they're studying. There's 2-year degrees that can lead to some great careers. Most notably, there's a lot of health field careers that need those 2-year degrees from a community college. And there's a lot of fields like that. So make sure you do research about what the career field you're looking at expects in a degree. Do they want that 4-year degree, or do they want the somewhat more affordable 2-year degree? You can also transfer to a 4-year school from the community college. So that's a great way to save money on the first 2 years of college and then transferring to finish out that last 2. And then, of course, even if you go straight to a 4-year college, don't forget that you can always save money at your local community college on some summer courses. This is a really popular way not only to take some classes for a cheaper rate and maybe knock out some requirements to ease the path to graduation, but it can also be a good opportunity to take a class that maybe you struggle with in a bigger setting. Like if you're going to a large university, maybe you want to take a class that you're not as strong in at the local community college over the summer. That way you may be able to get more personalized attention and possibly do better in the course. The key there is make sure to check with your 4-year college before you take that class to make sure it'll transfer appropriately though. All right, so once you've looked at all the big picture of the different colleges that are out there and you've got your list, one of the first things to the financial aid process isn't financial aid at all. It's understanding the costs, understanding the budget that you're trying to meet for each individual college. We know that colleges vary greatly in costs, but they all have to account for some specific things in common. So I want you to look on those colleges' websites to find their cost of attendance. And these are the things I want you to look for. So every school is going to have 2 different kinds of costs that they're going to give you an estimate of. The first type is direct costs, and these are the things that you're going to be paying in a bill directly to the college. So tuition is your seat in a class, okay? That's all that is. So there's going to be additional costs that you have to bill that are billed from that college. So required fees are also going to be included in that bill. Required fees are going to vary greatly from college to college. Community colleges have reasonably low fees in general. But the 4-year colleges, once you have students living 24/7 on a college campus, you need to provide more services. So their fees tend to be higher to provide for things like recreational services, security and safety services, a health center on campus. It just depends on what your college is offering is going to determine what those fees look like. And then you've got room and board, or meal plan is what I think of that as. So room and board is for if you're living on a 4-year college or campus, those things are going to be included in that bill, right? So you're going to have to pay for that dorm room and then any meals that you're eating on campus. So all that together is those direct costs. The indirect costs are going to be costs that are incurred that are necessary to pay for in order to go to and be successful at college, but they're not necessarily paid directly to the school. So of course, room and board, if you're living off campus, if you're staying at home, those move into indirect costs, but there's still costs that need to be accounted for somehow. So just keep that in mind. So the other indirect costs to consider are books and supplies, which this is an average. This is an average of what students spend in a given year at that college, and the college reports that. So keep that in mind because you might end up spending more or you might end up spending less. That can depend on the kind of program you're going into. Like if you're going into something that requires more specialized supplies or hardware or software or equipment in some way. And then it also depends on your own sort of demeanor or your attitude about saving money, right? If you go into it with a more frugal mindset of, I want to buy used books, I want to get a refurbished computer. If your campus offers a rental textbook program, that can be a really great way to save money as well. Transportation doesn't refer to the bus around campus. That's usually covered in required fees, but it really refers to your personal transportation to and from campus. Obviously, if you're commuting, that's going to have specific costs associated with it. But even if you're living on campus, make sure to understand what transportation costs you might have. For instance, do they charge for parking if you want to keep a car on campus? Things like that. And then you also have to account for personal and miscellaneous. Like maybe you want to buy a new outfit or shoes every now and then, or maybe you want to have some snacks in your dorm room, or whatnot. Go out for pizza. I think of this as pizza money. This is just the stuff of living life. You need to budget for those things as well, because you're not just a student, but you're also a person, living on campus or off campus, and need to afford the things for just general life. So all of these come together to form that cost of attendance. And you can find that on every college's website to start figuring out where you're starting and what you need to find financial aid to afford to go to that college. So here's a couple of examples of what you might see on colleges in North Carolina. On the left-hand side, you'll see an example from UNC Charlotte. I love this example because it gives a really detailed breakdown of not only each line item, but also how that cost will vary, perhaps, depending on where you're living. And so that's a really good example of where you might look at something like, for instance, transportation. Maybe you feel like you're not going to spend that much on transportation when you figure out what your needs are. So it's easier to figure out ways to kind of trim the fat when you have a very detailed breakdown like that. On the right-hand side, you see a more holistic example. This is from Elon, and it's just less detailed, right? So we want to make sure if you see one of these on the colleges that you're interested in, make sure you're looking for where they put those indirect expenses, and or if they do include those indirect expenses in that estimate. In this case, they do include it in the total estimate, and they say down below that it's about $3,500. So just make sure you're looking for that, because I want you to make sure you completely understand what costs go where and what might be a little bit more flexible in terms of timing and costs. All right, so the next step is really looking at financial aid and understanding the types of financial aid that you're even looking for. Financial aid really broadly is money that pays for college or vocational school. And there's different types of aid that you can find for those purposes. So the two main types are going to be gift aid in the form of scholarships and grants, and that is free money, and that is the money you do not have to pay back. So that is the gold standard. We want students to get as much of that free money as possible. And then the other type of money financial aid is self-help aid. And so self-help aid, one common kind of self-help aid that you may already have is a college savings program. Self-help aid just means that you're contributing to these funds somehow, either your family or the student themselves. And so the kinds of self-help aid that you can apply for are student loans and employment. In particular, there's one kind of employment that students may qualify for through filling out the FAFSA, and that's called work study. Work study is basically just a student gets a job on campus, is offered the opportunity to have a job on campus for about 10 to 15 hours a week, and is paid just like a normal job. It's just through a federal program that they receive that money. So that can be a good opportunity for students to not only get connected with campus, but also earn a little bit of money to take down some of those indirect expenses. Fun fact, they've done studies that show that students who have a job on campus on average actually have a higher GPA than students who don't. So that was a really interesting study that I like to share, because sometimes students are really concerned about their grades slipping. And so it just goes to show you can stay organized, but they did find that students who worked over 15 hours a week, their academics went down. So if you are going to work, that's great. Just make sure to keep those hours to a reasonable level, so you make sure to be a good student as well. So the two reasons you'd receive these types of aid are either need-based, which is based on the family's finances, or merit-based, which is based on a student's characteristics. There could be any number of student characteristics that you can find merit-based aid for. So it could be a talent, like an athletic talent, an academic talent, an artistic talent. It could be based on a student's identity and career interests. So like if you see, sometimes there's things for women in STEM. There's a lot of scholarships out there that are merit-based, and they pick their own criteria. So there is literally something for everything. There are, redheaded, left-handed scholarships. There are all sorts of things. So definitely when looking for scholarships that are merit-based, you can search pretty much anything and find at least one scholarship for it. So the first place to start for applying for financial aid, though, are these two forms. On the left-hand side, you see the North Carolina Residency Determination Service. That is for all North Carolina colleges, whether public or private. Now, if you're applying to any public colleges in North Carolina, this will help you to get that in-state tuition rate if you're found as an in-state resident. So that's one way to save money on college, is to get that discounted rate. And then the other reason to fill out the RDS for any college in North Carolina, public or private, is to potentially become eligible for North Carolina state grants. And you'll remember from the last slide, grants are that free money. So we want you to get as much of that money as possible. The second form is the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. And that really is the first step to applying for aid anywhere in the country. So this is a national application, and it is the primary application for need-based aid. Now, the other thing I like to mention, though, is that many colleges won't consider you for merit-based aid unless you filled out the FAFSA for need-based aid. The reason is pretty straightforward. They want to make sure that you've gotten all the need-based funds from the federal government and state government before they start looking at their college and institutional funds. The third form that I'd like to mention, it's not as common, so I'll just mention it briefly, is the CSS profile. And that's found on collegeboard.org. That one, it costs a little bit of money to fill out. There are waivers, but it's not required by a lot of schools. In North Carolina in particular, there's 5 colleges that do ask for that. It's UNC Chapel Hill, Wake Forest, Duke, Elon, and Davidson. So if you're looking at any of those colleges, they may ask you for this extra form. You're going to do this on top of the FAFSA if you're asked for it, and it just takes a deeper dive into folks' finances. The goal of that form is to make sure that students are getting any and all aid that they might qualify for at that institution. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a little bit of extra work. So I wouldn't recommend looking at that form unless you're asked for it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what to do when you get to the NC Residency Determination Service. So we talked about that this is a really important form for North Carolina schools. Hopefully you already have a cfnc.org account, students, but if you don't, you can always create one for free at cfnc.org. When you have your account, you can either log in straight from cfnc.org through the apply section, or you can go to ncresidency.org directly to start that application. Either way you go, you're going to use that cfnc.org username and password, but you're going to need also parent and student information. So because many students are still dependents and they haven't really established a lot of information to be verified in North Carolina, it asks for a lot of parent information. So it's going to ask for things like driver's license. It might ask for voter registration information, car registration information, any number of things that can tie parents and students to their address in North Carolina and just to living in North Carolina for enough time to qualify for the state programs. One other thing I like to mention, do not skip questions if you have the information somewhere. So sometimes folks tell me, oh, well, we skipped the question about the car registration because we didn't have it in front of us. And then they got to the end of the form and they'd skipped several things and then were found out of state. And they're like, but we've lived here our entire lives. It turns out that they just skipped too much information. So you can skip things that you don't have, but if you do have them, I do recommend just pausing the interview, finding those items and coming back to it. If you skip ahead through the form, you won't necessarily be allowed to go back to the item that you skipped before, is the other tricky part. So you definitely just want to pause where you're at, find it, and then come back when you have that item. The next thing that happens is once you finish that form, you're given something called an RCN, a residency certification number. That's the number you're going to give to your colleges. Some colleges may ask you to actually input that on the admissions application, which is why I always say it's a pretty good idea to do this before you start an admissions application in North Carolina. That way you don't have to stop and fill out another form and then come back to that application if you're really needing to submit that day. The other thing that I like to mention to students is when you're filling out this form, I really recommend providing your cell phone number and opting in for text messages, just so you can get any updated information you might need from the residency determination service. So initially, they'll give you an initial finding of whether you're found in state or out of state, but that's pending verification. So they'll try to validate that information that you've put in the form. And if they can't validate it or they need extra information, they're going to need that within 25 days of you filling out the form. So it will send you an email, but I know for many people, getting a text message is easier. So if you opt in for text and you need to give them something additional or confirm something for verification or validation of your information, it'll text you at day 8, day 14, and day 25 to make sure that you know that you need to provide something extra. If not, if you don't do that in time, you'll have to do an extra process to kind of resolve it. So I want you to make sure you know that in a timely fashion. If you have a tricky situation, something unique in your family, if there's things that you really want to dig into about the determination service before you fill it out, you can find lots of resources on cfnc.org/RDS. Or I really like on the residency page itself, there's frequently asked questions and there's resource pages that actually have screenshots of exactly what you need to click in different scenarios. For instance, if you have parents who are not citizens, that's a unique situation. So you might want to look at that information to see exactly what you might need to do in order to go through that process. And there's an RDS call center. So if you ever have questions, you can always call to these folks. They talk to people all day long, every day about residency. So they are really, really useful folks to have in your corner and ask those questions too. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we are going to get to the FAFSA. So before I dig into the FAFSA, I had a quick question about the residency. So I'm going to answer that one real quick because I think it's really relevant. The earliest you can fill out the residency determination service is July before senior year, because the finding will expire within, I think, 14 to 15 months is the rule of thumb, and it needs to be active when the student enrolls. So the rule of thumb is don't do it until July before senior year, for those of you parents that might have juniors right now. So let's go on to the FAFSA. So FAFSA, why should you fill it out? Well, it is the first stop to being considered for all these different kinds of aid. We talked about the different types of aid, but we didn't really talk about the organizations that might give students these kinds of aid. So first, once you fill out the FAFSA, those results go to the financial aid offices of the institutions that you've designated on the form. And then they can look at that information and determine what the student qualifies for from the federal government, the state government, the institution itself. And then I also put private scholarships on here. Now, you're not automatically necessarily considered for private scholarships, but many private scholarships will also ask for FAFSA results if they have a need-based component. So getting that FAFSA filled out can sort of open a lot of different doors for students to receive aid for college. So of course, I'm hoping you're getting the idea that every student should be filling out the FAFSA who's interested in going to college, whether community college, 4-year, 2-year, any in between. But just be aware that most high school students, since they are still considered dependents, will likely need a parent to help complete the FAFSA. And the question I get asked most commonly is about separated or divorced parents who aren't living together. So if parents are separated or divorced, the parent with whom the student lived with the most in the past year is the student who should fill out the FAFSA with the student who should help that student complete the form. Now, if it's a 50-50 situation and it's hard to suss out one parent, having custody more than the other, then you're going to look at the finances. So it's going to be the parent who provided the most financial support to that student in the past year. And just keep in mind, whichever parent is going to be filling out the FAFSA, if it is a separated or divorced parent, they're also going to need to include a step parent's information if they have remarried. So it's that parent plus whoever their current spouse is. And also be aware that there are students who have unique situations and are not considered dependents. So definitely be aware of that. You can always reach out to your financial aid offices and kind of talk through this process if you have something unique. But I can say in particular, students in foster care, under legal guardianship, ward of the court, or orphans are going to fill out the FAFSA as independent. So just know that, but there's always help to go through this process if you have a unique situation. Definitely reach out to the financial aid offices. So when do you fill out the FAFSA? Well, the application is open now. It's really exciting. It just opened. So the application itself is open October 1st every year for the following year's aid. So whereas the RDS process, you can kind of take care of that once and sort of set it and forget it if you stay at the same school until you graduate. For FAFSA, if you want to receive aid for the following year, you need to do it each year. So once it opens October 1st, it's a good idea to do it as soon as possible. The reasons for that are varied. The first reason is less stress on you. I mean, when you fill this out early in the process, you have a lot of built-in cushion time to troubleshoot any issues that come up. And as we know, with things like this, it's always when you think it's smooth sailing that something steps up and says, oh, wait, you have to do this one more thing. So definitely that is helpful. Then also know that college deadlines vary. They can be at all different times. Each college sets them. The earliest one I know of off the top of my head is December 1st. But we often say if students complete the FAFSA in October, that's a really good thing because then you have all of November at least to troubleshoot anything that might come up. And the final reason we recommend doing this as early as possible is because some of that grant money, that free money from the state or the colleges themselves, or even the federal government, it can run out. So it's sort of a pot of money for that year, and whoever is eligible it's sort of a first come, first serve order by date of FAFSA completion. So that's why we say we just want you to be in line as early as possible for any money that you might qualify for. So this is just an overview of the process. We're going to dig into some of this stuff as we go, but it's helpful to think about it as a timeline. And so I wanted you to kind of see where we're going from start to finish. So step one, create your account. We'll talk about how to do that. But before you dive into the FAFSA application itself, I really highly recommend step two, which is gather your information. We'll talk about what you need to fill out the FAFSA. And I've got to say, it really does reduce stress if you have the information in front of you, so you don't have to stop and start with the FAFSA application itself. Then once you've completed the FAFSA, you're going to make sure to check for that student aid report. That is what the results of your FAFSA are called. And those will go to the student's email and file about a week after they click submit on an electronic FAFSA application. Then you're going to follow up with any info you might see on the student aid report. They might need something additional from you, or you might need to fix something or amend something. And just keep regularly checking those emails, those portals, any information that comes, you want to make sure you're getting it as soon as possible because it may be time sensitive. It may be something like an invitation to apply for additional aid that they have at the college, things like that. You don't want to miss that stuff. And then the last step is the exciting step, right? When you start getting those admissions, acceptances, and getting those financial aid offer letters, and really looking at and figuring out and comparing to see what's the best financial fit for your family, in addition to the best fit in terms of programs and places for the student to be. All right, so you can find this application in a couple of different places. You can go to studentaid.gov. That's usually what I recommend to folks because that is the parent site of all federal student aid, and it has lots of information about federal aid programs. It also has a good spot for you to create your account with the FAFSA system. You can also go straight to FAFSA.gov, which has the application itself, and then you can even complete the entire process from start to finish on your phone if you download the free My Student Aid app. Now, even if you don't want to complete the entire process on your phone, I like this app because it gives you the option to view the status of your application, and you can even pull up your student aid report afterward. So it's really handy to have it on your phone in case you need to pull that information up on the go. So creating your account is so easy. It only takes like maybe 5 minutes per person, and because it only requires a few things to get started. Now, who should create an account? The student should definitely create an FSA ID. That is the name of the account, FSA ID. That is going to be their login for their application. But we talked about before that a student's going to need to have a parent complete this with them. So whichever parent is going to be doing the FAFSA application with them, they can also start an FSA ID if they have a social security number. So if you already had a student go through this process and you already have an FSA ID, there's no need to create another one. It's one FSA ID per social security number. So that's kind of how that works. So that FSA ID is going to serve as the secure login and also the signature at the end of the application. It only requires a few things, but it's really important that that social security number be accurate to tie your information correctly. So social security number, a mobile phone number, and an email are all they ask for. I recommend giving both a mobile phone number and an email though, because if you do get locked out, it's easier to get back in if they have more information. Also know that it can take up to 3 days for that information to be verified. So I recommend doing this at least one full day before you plan to sit down and fill out the FAFSA. Up to 3 days is really best. So what are you going to need once you get into that FAFSA application? Some of this is going to be general information, demographic information, information about where your address, where you're living, your driver's license if you have one. If the parents have recently married, separated, or divorced, it's good to have that date on hand before you start the application, because that's something they're going to ask for. Also, you can list up to 10 colleges on the FAFSA application. I recommend students add as many colleges as they're even possibly considering applying to, whether or not they've started the application. This process is sort of separate from the admissions applications, but we really want students to make sure to add all of the colleges they're applying to. So that's why it does not hurt to add a college that you don't end up applying to, but it can cause issues if you forget to add a college that you end up applying to. So you can go on there later and add colleges, just don't forget to do that if you need to do that. When you're going through the form, make sure to answer all questions. One thing I recommend in particular is it's going to ask you if you want to be considered for work study. We talked a little bit about what work study is a few minutes ago. I recommend that everybody click yes. It doesn't commit the student to having to do that job or having to have work study, but it at least gives you all of the options, and you can decide whether or not the student wants to do that later on. Also, make sure to answer any and every question, because you never know if it might be tied to a financial aid opportunity that the college has. So they can see the results and maybe they say, oh goodness, we have this scholarship that fits with something that you answered on that FAFSA form. Also, parents, if they don't have a social security number, they can still enter information on this form. They just can't get an FSA ID, and they should enter all zeros for a social security number. And then at the end, you can do a physical signature. So you print out a signature page instead of signing with that FSA ID. So here's the nitty-gritty of the financial information that parents are going to need, parents and students, forgive me. So there's two different kinds of financial information they want, so it's important that I spell this out a little bit. So first, income. Income that they're asking for students and parents to report is income from 2 years prior to enrollment year. So in this case, if you're enrolling in 2022, you're going to be looking at the 2020 information. You can find that on your tax returns, on W-2s. You're also going to want to make sure to report any untaxed income. So they're going to look for that information as well. And that's, again, still 2 years prior to enrollment year. Then assets are going to be as of the day you click submit on the FAFSA. So that's a little bit different. And assets, I like to make sure you understand what they're looking for. So they're looking for cash, savings, checking accounts, if you have a college savings account, but they're not looking for money that's earmarked for bills. So I like to think of it as, what is your balance in your checking account the day before you get paid, right? After you've paid your bills, you're waiting for that next paycheck to come in. Then you also want to include any real estate investments, but make sure not to report any retirement specific accounts. So if you have a 403B, a 401k, an IRA, anything like that does not get reported as an asset on the FAFSA because you can't access that information or access that money to pay for college. Also, small family businesses under 100 employees do not need to be reported on the FAFSA. And also same thing with a family farm. If you all live on a family farm with a few animals, things like that, that's not what they're looking for. They're not looking for you to report your home, but rather larger investments and businesses. So once you've reported the financial information, that's great, but there is a way to do this without having to enter line by line your tax information, which is really a great opportunity to save time and stress. So this is called the data retrieval tool. What you would need to do is have an FSA ID. That's the first step to being eligible to using this, but students and parents who have an FSA ID can try to use this tool. It's most folks that I've encountered have been able to use it. It's when you have a unique tax situation that it can't import exactly. That's when it doesn't allow folks to do it. But it's definitely worth the shot because it pulls your information from your taxes with your permission into your FAFSA application. So that can really save you time on the front end and also save you time potentially after you filled out the FAFSA because it minimizes the chances you'll be asked to verify any of your income information that was pulled in from the IRS. So it minimizes the chances you'll have to submit additional things after the application, which is also a really good reason to use this tool. So once you finish that, you're going to get to the sign and submit page. And I like to mention that this is a two-step process. So the student signs with their FSA ID by logging into the form. The parent goes ahead and provides their FSA ID login to sign the second part. Or if the parent doesn't have an FSA ID, they're going to go ahead and print a signature page. And then you click submit. And that's why I mentioned that. I know it sounds silly, but sometimes folks sign and forget that they have to submit and then they're done. So the way that you know you're done is if you hit this FAFSA confirmation page that comes up. Now that confirmation page is also going to be emailed to the student's email on file. So I recommend checking right after you click submit on the FAFSA to make sure that email came through, just so you know you're getting emails successfully from the Federal Student Aid Department. That way you know when you'll get any and all communications and you won't miss them. So the results of the FAFSA are going to be called an EFC, the expected family contribution. What that means is, by the federal government's calculations, this is going to be what a family can reasonably be expected to spend on college in a given year. So that EFC, the expected family contribution, isn't necessarily what you end up spending, but it is an important number in the awarding of aid because financial aid offices take that number and they subtract it from that cost of attendance we talked about at the beginning of this session. And what's left over is the student's eligibility for need-based funds. And so colleges take that number, that eligibility number, and they're trying to find any and all things that that student qualifies for up to that amount. They can't always meet 100% of that number, but that is their goal, is to find as much aid as they can up to that number. It just depends on what they have available through federal, state, and campus funds in order to meet that 100% of need. And so the first place you're going to see that number is going to be on that student aid report, which is why it's so important to keep an eye out for that link coming to the student's email. Again, about a week after submission. There's a couple things I want you to check on once you get that student aid report. Of course, look at that expected family contribution. You'll see in the example on the screen, it's a 0, and that's not a mistake. Some students may have a 0, some students may find it's all the way up to $100,000 and more. Just depends on the family's finances what that number is. Then the next thing I want you to look for is in that box there. There's a couple of things. It says, in this case, your FAFSA appears to be complete. If it's not complete or if there's issues with it, it'll say so right there. It'll also give you a list below this section of all the things you entered on your FAFSA application. So I recommend looking through all that info just to make sure it looks correct, just glancing through to catch any typos, things like that. The last thing that's really important to check for is whether or not you've been selected for verification. So verification is a process where the student and parents need to submit documents that you use to fill out the FAFSA to the financial aid offices at the colleges. So basically, the colleges are tasked with verifying a specific item on the FAFSA, and they're going to ask you for that documentation that corresponds with that. Does not mean you've done anything wrong if you have been selected. About 30% of all FAFSAs each year are selected for verification, much of it random. So it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. They're just tasked with getting that documentation. So what you need to do is call the financial aid offices that you're applying to and ask them what they need and how you can submit that information to them. The key is to do this as soon as you know that you need to do it, and to do it kind of quickly, because the financial aid process is set on hold until verification is satisfied. So you just want to take care of that process as soon as possible, but don't stress about it. The key here is to just kind of take care of it so you can go through the process. Know that some people are never selected and some folks are selected seemingly every year, but you can always minimize the chances you'll be selected by using that data retrieval tool, and hopefully you won't be selected. So the last thing I do want to talk about with regard to the financial aid and FAFSA process in particular, is that there's some things that cannot be documented on the FAFSA. And the financial aid offices know this, that there's certain things that happen in a family's life and financial life that, just aren't easily put into that form. So if you have something like unusually high medical expenses, or a recent divorce, or if there's a loss of employment, right? That's a common thing I get asked about, because they ask for income that's 2 years prior to the year of enrollment. So maybe something's changed with your income since then. No matter what the circumstance is, you're going to call the financial aid office and explain to them what's going on and see if you might qualify for something called a professional judgment, which just means that the financial aid office is applying their professional judgment to your circumstance. But if they are going to do that and possibly amend your offer, they're going to need a written explanation and documentation of what's been going on. So definitely you're going to call them and ask them how they need these things if you qualify. So, they might have a form, they might just have you write a letter, and just make sure to hold on to any documents that relate to the special circumstance that's happening. And you can find all sorts of help with your FAFSA on CFNC. Of course, we talked about that. But one thing I wanted to highlight in particular, first, we have these video resources, but really cool is that we have this local assistance map. And that map, when you click on it, it shows you that all those dots represent all the financial aid offices throughout the state that are so happy to help with your FAFSA process. So click on one of those, it'll give you the contact information, the office hours, who to talk to. You can actually call financial aid offices of colleges you're not at all applying to. The financial aid officers are concerned with access, not enrollment. They want to make sure you're getting all the information you need to reach the next step in your journey. So definitely know that you can reach out to any of them. There's also going to be some FAFSA Day drive-in events I mentioned earlier, October 23rd, Saturday, October 23rd, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. You can bring a charged laptop, your documents, and go to any of the campuses that are listed on this screen, and we will help you fill out that FAFSA. We will get it done that day, hopefully. So, just definitely come, let us help you with that process. And then this is sort of the last step, right? We talked about that you're going to hopefully get great admissions offers and financial aid offers, but you really want to line them up side by side towards the end of this process to start figuring out what's the best option for you. So you can see here, this is actually a real student example from a few years ago. And these campuses start at very different cost of attendances, right? The EFC stays the same no matter where the student's applying, and the difference in what they need to attend each college is based on the cost of attendance. So what the student needs to attend Campus C is a lot higher than Campus A. But when you look at what the student was awarded, remember how at the beginning we talked about that private schools sometimes have different funding. Well, in this case, they did. They had quite a bit more funding to offer the student to compensate for the initially high sticker price. So you can kind of follow down, and ultimately Campus C ended up being the most affordable option, even when you consider the loans in there. So it's just an important reminder to go through the process. It doesn't always look like this. Sometimes it ends up that, Campus C will still be more expensive, but, perhaps it will be less expensive than you started out and thought it would be. So definitely there's a lot of programs online to help you do this kind of comparison. And so I really highly recommend to do this though, so you know what you're looking at, apples to apples, in making those decisions. One thing that you might see on an offer is student loans from the federal government. So it's worth pausing here for just a quick sec to explain the difference between the two kinds of student loans. One is subsidized, and because it's need-based, there's no interest accrued to the student while they're in school. The unsubsidized loan, however, is not need-based, and so interest begins from the day the student takes out the loan. So when you're looking at your aid offers, I would just encourage you to remember this piece, because if you are going to reduce the amount of loans that the student's going to take out, it makes sense to start with the unsubsidized loans, because over time, they're going to be more expensive than the subsidized loan because the interest begins immediately. And you're just going to have to compare a lot of information about these, not only the numbers, but also things like, if I do bring outside scholarships, how are they handled by the financial aid office? Do they consider that stackable, meaning that they just added on top of what they've put in my financial aid offer? Or does that mean they would have to replace some money from the financial aid offer with that outside scholarship? Different colleges handle that differently. So that's something that's really going to be important when you're looking at making those decisions. Also look and see if those awards, like if they have scholarships or grants that they've given to the student, are those renewable? So are they eligible to get that same aid the following year if they get good grades, or what are the criteria for receiving that again, if possible? Also look at if you're going to take out loans, I highly recommend using a calculator to see what is that loan payment going to look like after graduation. And again, if there's anything that concerns you, you can always reach out to those financial aid offices and say, this doesn't look right. Is there something that, you can consider about our situation that might increase our aid amounts? And then, of course, scholarship searches. So if you haven't been looking on college websites for college scholarships, now's the time to do that. For any four-year colleges, many of them have fall deadlines. Some are automatic when you apply, but some have outside applications. Also, some are time sensitive, meaning they're tied to that early application deadline, whether that's early action, early decision, things like that. So definitely check that out. Also, there's lots of local scholarships, and I put that next because that is often a really good place to look for scholarships. Check out your high school counselor website for scholarships that they recommend that are local. Look at school district and regional foundations. There's a lot of school foundations that offer scholarships in the spring. Look at businesses, either your parents' employer or the student's employer might have scholarships. Look at church groups, look at other faith groups, service organizations. There's all sorts of scholarships out there. You just have to kind of put out the feelers and see what groups you belong to that might be offering scholarships. And again, many of those have spring deadlines. The first one that I know of doesn't really come up until December or so. And then there's, of course, national scholarships. These are just a few examples. You can also use Google and Google, the qualities or characteristics that you're trying to find a scholarship for and the word scholarship. Just be aware that there are scams out there. And you should never have to pay for financial aid information or scholarship information. Make sure to be aware of what you're looking at. And if it feels hinky, run it by a school counselor or another trusted adult that you feel like has a good eye for those sort of things. Also, there's lots of scholarships on CFNC. You can sort this and search by all sorts of things. Some of them are specific to different counties or programs, careers. There's a lot of things on here, so I definitely recommend checking that out. And there's also a free financial basics course where you can, if you finish it, students with a 80% or better, and you can retake quizzes. If you finish it with an 80% or better, you're entered into a lottery to win one of a few $500 scholarships, but you need to do that by the beginning of May. So it takes about 2 hours or so from start to finish to do this course. So it's got videos and things. I don't think it's too painful. It's good information and might lead to a scholarship on top of it. All right, what else is there? Tell me there's other things. Well, there are some other things that I want to make sure that you know about, you can look into. Of course, savings program, college savings. It's never too late to save, particularly if you know the student's going to be going on for several years. Also, look at campus programs. So there's some campus programs that you qualify for when you're applying. And then there's other campus programs that open up once you're a student there. So my advice is always keep looking for scholarship money. You always want to just keep your ear out and talk to advisors, talk to the career center, the financial aid office. There's a lot of opportunities in academic departments once you know what your major is. You can also start a payment plan with colleges, but make sure to look at the details of what those payment plans are. They may have an interest rate similar to a loan. You just never know. So definitely look at what the criteria are for those payment plans at the colleges. And then of course, there's additional educational loans if you need to fill a gap after all is said and done. I would recommend that you do some careful comparison shopping with additional loans past the student federal loans, though. The Parent Plus loans are something you can apply for, but note that the interest rate is much higher than the student rate. There's also North Carolina Assist loans, NC Assist loans. That's a nonprofit loan with no loan fees and pretty reasonable rates. You can actually take that out of state as well, as long as you're a North Carolina resident, even if you're going to, say, University of Tennessee. You can go there with an NC Assist loan. So just keep that one in mind. You can also use it at North Carolina schools, obviously, as well. And then credit unions, banks, things like that. Just be careful with some of those private lenders like Sallie Mae or names like that, because some can raise their rates quarterly all the way up to as much as 18%. So definitely pay attention to that. A few other resources, definitely check out the College Scorecard. That is a national database of all educational organizations in the country, and you can sort some really interesting information out there. You can find out what the average student pays to go to your college after financial aid, and you can even see a breakdown by income bracket of family. You can find out the graduation rates of these colleges. You can find out how much debt students on average leave these colleges with. You can find out all sorts of really good information about this investment. The last thing I did want to mention, there's all sorts of stuff on studentaid.gov. There's an EFC estimator. There's a financial aid toolkit. We also have a bunch of financial aid calculators on CFNC. Those are also really helpful for this process. One thing I do like to mention to folks is that 40% of all college dropouts cite financial reasons as one of the reasons that they left school. So being educated about this process, being here tonight, using these tools as you go through the process is so important, because we want our students to go to college, but we also want them to stay there and graduate and get into that career of their dreams. So definitely use all the resources that you can at your disposal to make sure that your family is making the right decision for you all. And if you want to stay up to date on the latest, you can always get connected with CFNC CFNC generally. We're found on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram as College Foundation of North Carolina or at MyCFNC. You can also follow me, Devin, at CFNC, or your local Charlotte rep. She's Tamika at CFNC. But we try to post all sorts of information to help you with applying to college, paying for college, just making those college plans in general. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you coming to this talk. I'm going to go ahead and close down the recording so that we can talk about some of the chat questions. So let me just find that real quick. Sorry.